Okay, what is this? Where to begin? So, a few weeks ago, the internet was graced by a Star Trek short film called 765874-Unification, in which Captain Kirk and Spock, as played by the original actors, hold hands and die. This short film has made a bit of a splash in the Trekkie fandom. It's currently sitting at over 5 million views despite being an unlisted video, and has generally been very positively received, which we'll get to it. Now, I have many questions about this, fundamental questions that are frustratingly hard to answer, like, who made this? Why? How? And why is it called 765874-Unification? Some of these questions are easy to answer, and others are a spiral into nightmares. But before we get to that, I should probably fill you in on the basics. Why are Kirk and Spock holding hands? Maybe I'm being a bit flippant when I say it's about Kirk and Spock holding hands and dying. I mean, that definitely does happen, but there is more to it than that. 765874-Unification is a very artsy bit of media. It has almost no dialogue except for a voiceover, which is a line from a previous Star Trek movie. Mostly it's Captain Kirk kinda walking around looking confused. 765874-Unification is not something you can really even try to engage with without some familiarity with Star Trek. Arguably a lot of familiarity with Star Trek, but you at least need to know who Kirk and Spock are and how they died. Kirk died at the end of Star Trek Generations when he was crushed by a bridge. Spock died off-screen in an alternate timeline because Leonard Nimoy died between movies. It's generally considered by fans that both of these deaths were somewhat anticlimactic, considering how pivotal these characters are to the series. 765874-Unification, then, is an attempt to fix that, to give these characters a more satisfying conclusion, using space magic to bring them together across time and space to share a moment of connection. Now, I personally find the whole thing too unsettling and weird to get anything emotional out of it, but I understand why it works for people, especially all these 70-year-old men in the comments of the video who watched the original series when it was new. I'm sure it's all very nostalgic. I was more distracted by just how incredibly niche this whole thing is, so let me start by answering the easiest question. Why is it called 765874-Unification? Well, this is actually the fourth short film in a series which started 2 years ago with a 30-second video just called 765874, which features a very obscure Star Trek character, Yeoman J.M. Colt, who was one of the crew of the Enterprise in the very first pilot episode of Star Trek, The Cage. 765874 is Colt's Starfleet serial number as revealed in a Star Trek comic from 1998. In case it wasn't obvious yet, this is some intensely nerdy territory we're getting into. Colt is in all of these shorts. In her comic run, she has some kind of temporal event which gives her knowledge of a bunch of different timelines. So these shorts are kind of an artsy rendition of her visions, I think. It's very unclear, intentionally so. There's a lot of up to your interpretation going on here. I actually first became aware of these shorts last year with their previous short, 765874-Regeneration, in which Spock visits Kirk's grave from the end of Generations and nicks his comm badge. Unification is by far the longest and most ambitious of these shorts though, and J.M. Colt is only one of many extremely niche characters and references to make their way into this short. I mean, first we start on a shot of Gary Mitchell, Kirk's friend who became a god in the second pilot episode of Star Trek and has never been seen since. In the Garden of Eden, or whatever this is supposed to be, Kirk runs into Saavik, as played by Robin Curtis from Star Trek 3 and 4, but much more obscure, standing behind her, is Sorak, Saavik and Spock's son from the Star Trek novel Vulcan's Heart, in which Saavik and Spock get married and raise a son. Then Kirk meets Yor, some guy who was mentioned for 5 seconds in Star Trek Discovery Season 3, and Yor apparently transports him into the void where he has a face-off with himself, and then he holds hands with Spock. Like they did at the end of the motion picture, it's references all the way down. So, while unification refers to Kirk and Spock, I suppose it also refers to the unification of many abstract parts of the Star Trek greater universe. I should explain, you know how in Star Wars everything is supposed to be in continuity? Comics, books, games, movies, TV shows. That's how you can have characters like Cobb Vanth showing up in The Mandalorian. Yet Star Trek doesn't work like that. Books and comics and things like that have always been considered extended media that the movies and TV shows are unlikely to actually incorporate. That makes this short film incorporating all of that stuff very weird and adds to my confusion as to how this thing got made. Because I probably should have made this clear before, this isn't a fan film, this was produced by the Roddenberry Archive. which is a collaborative project between the estate of Gene Roddenberry, the father of Star Trek, and a company called Otoy to archive a bunch of production assets, models, sets, that kind of thing. It's basically the Walt Disney Archive, but for Star Trek. So this is about as officially licensed as it gets. And more than that, I can tell just by looking at it that this thing cost at least millions of dollars to make. I mean, Leonard Nimoy is dead and William Shatner is 93. He looks pretty good for 93, but he doesn't look like this, right? Some magic techno trickery is going on here. I mean, they got Michael Giacchino to do the music. He's like a real composer. Why would you put all of that time and money into this and then release it unlisted and unmonetized for free? That's not how capitalism works, so what's the angle here? My gut tells me that this is a tech demo disguising itself as a nostalgic for the fans project, but Otoy have been rather obtuse about what their technology actually is and how it works. So here's what we do know. First of all, this is not de-aging technology, this isn't William Shatner walking around. In fact, I seriously doubt you could guess who it is because it's actually Sam Witwer, Starkiller himself. Everyone behind the scenes refers to this technology as digital prosthetics, but it's essentially a really high-tech Instagram filter that's putting William Shatner's face over Sam Witwer's. I guess the name deepfake is out of vogue. This tech isn't new, per se, Luke Skywalker and all that, but this is probably the best it's ever looked, at least in my eyes, so I guess that's noteworthy. Part of that, I think, is that the deepfake stuff is done in conjunction with actual old-school prosthetics. As you can see, the guy who's playing Spock is actually wearing physical prosthetics to look more like Leonard Nimoy. And then they're doing CGI magic on top of that. But the real magic that makes this distinct from traditional deepfake type stuff is that, at least according to Sam Witwer, the effect is being applied in camera, which, if true, is pretty impressive.
It is a mask, and it is a very sensitive mask. And the way that you work with it, because it's in real time, is extremely helpful to the performer. In the same way that when I wear real prosthetics, physical prosthetics, I can see it in the mirror and start developing the character. Well, when the digital prosthetics go on and it's in real time and I can look at the feed and I can see Captain Kirk, there he is.
With this kind of technology, there is always a question of ethics, although considering that William Shatner himself, along with Leonard Nimoy's widow, are producers on this, permission is certainly not an issue, and because it's 2024 and everyone is hyper-vigilant, there's the question of AI involvement, and on that we have mixed messages. Bill says yes, everyone else says no. I'm willing to chalk that one up to a 93-year-old man not knowing exactly what generative AI is, and that's reasonable because most people younger than 93 also don't really understand what it is. Although on the other hand, Otoy's CEO says that it incorporated machine learning tech into the facial recognition software, so maybe just nobody knows what this tech actually is. The point is, we have this technology that can turn Sam Witwer into William Shatner, and we're using it to create an incredibly niche short film about holding hands, and I feel no closer to knowing why. Let's talk about Otoy. Beyond sounding like the villain in a Deus Ex game, what's their deal? This is a much more complicated question than I would like it to be, but to put it as simply as possible, Otoy are a 3D graphics rendering company. They're one of those companies that's a very big deal to a very specific group of people. When you're working in 3D, the final part of the process is rendering. This is when all the textures and fancy lighting effects are applied to the project. And the thing about rendering is that it takes ages and requires crap loads of processing power. For bigger projects like a Pixar movie, rendering can take days per frame. And Pixar has their own render farm, a computer built just for rendering with over 20,000 cores. It's just a massively time and resource consuming process. This time and resource issue creates a pretty big barrier for entry when it comes to working in 3D, so this is how we get cloud rendering companies. The basic idea is that you take your file and send it to some company that has a bigger and stronger PC than you, and then they'll render it for you, at a cost of course. Otoy is sort of one of these companies. First of all, their big flagship product is a thing called Octane Render, which is just a software that renders things for you off of your own GPU. I've heard it's quite good. But they also own the Render Network, which is a decentralized cloud-based network based on blockchain technology. Ah, fuck. Okay, hold on. hold on. Let's not jump to any conclusions now, shall we? Yes, Otoi does run their own cryptocurrency, and yes, almost every single crypto project ever is a giant scam, but that doesn't mean we know for sure that this one is a scam until we do our due diligence now, does it? So, let's dig a little deeper, shall we? So, Otoi is the brainchild of a guy called Jules Urbach, a farmer game developer who's been bouncing around the 3D development space for the past 20 years or so and has a lot of industry connections. He's also an executive producer and wrote the story for Unification, so just keep that in mind going forward. Otoi has a whole bunch of high-profile investors, including J.J. Abrams, Ari Emanuel, and Mike Winkelmann, also known as Beeple, who was one of the first guys to make it really big in the NFT space. I don't think it's a fad. It's actually very simple and can be applied to so many different things. It's proving ownership of something. It's hard for me to imagine this kind of all evaporating away. People have too much of an emotional connection to this stuff. Yeah, how's that working out for you, buddy? The Render Network was set up in 2017, though, well before the NFT boom, and the basic idea of it isn't completely awful. Basically, instead of sending your file to a firm that just has a big warehouse full of processors, you send it to an online network where it's split apart and sent to 100 different smaller computers that will process a smaller part of the larger job. This is theoretically more efficient because the combined computing power of every single computer in the world is basically infinite, whereas for a traditional cloud rendering firm, you're going to run out of space to put your computers eventually. The limitation is real estate. So how does the blockchain fit into this system? Well, the entire transactional system of the Render Network is built on the blockchain. The Solana blockchain, to be specific, although it used to be run on Ethereum. The idea is that renderers are paid for their work in render tokens, which are generated in a similar way to the traditional way of generating cryptocurrency, proof of work, where you just have a PC generate the solutions to a bunch of pointless maths problems. This is instead proof of render. Basically, the PC that's doing the rendering is generating a bunch of render tokens at the same time. So wait, the renderers aren't paid by the people who are asking them to do the rendering? No, let's pull out the chart. So, on one end we have the artist, and on the other end we have the renderer. Now, in the silly old-fashioned way of doing things, the artist would send their work to the renderer, then they would send it back, and to cap it all off, the artist would send the renderer money for doing their job. And if they did a good job, then they may repeat this process again later. Here's how it works on the Render Network. Oh god. Let's break this down, shall we? So when an artist or stakeholder on the Render Network wants work done, they pay for the work they want done in whatever their regular currency is, what they call fiat currency. But that currency isn't being sent to the renderer. Instead, rendered tokens are bought at an equal value to that fiat currency and then chucked into a fire and removed from circulation in a process they call burning. At the same time, new render tokens are created or minted by the renderer or node operator on the render machine in the proof of render system. And these new tokens should be equal to the amount of tokens that have been burned. This is what they call a BME system, a burn mint equilibrium. The idea is that by maintaining a set amount of currency in circulation, the economy is more stable. Why not simply pay the renderer in render tokens without this BME step? Well, because this part is what gives render tokens value, because like all cryptocurrencies, the basis of the token is computational power. You need this step somewhere in the process, otherwise the token has no value. So then, why not simply pay the renderer in actual money? Now what about all that other stuff? Well, first, most simply, before that fiat currency is spent on render tokens, the Render Network Foundation takes a 5% transaction fee. Simple enough. But there's also a whole bunch of incentives to go around. For this system to work properly, people need to be using it, and so to get people using it, the Foundation has implemented a 5-year incentive program. Basically, instead of being burned at this point, a percentage of these render tokens will be sent back to the original artist to incentivize continued use. Because hey, free money. A percentage will also be sent to the node operators to incentivize continued render work, because hey, free money. And finally, a percentage will be sent to external token holders, what they call liquidity providers. These folks have nothing to do with the system at all, they're just people who currently own render tokens. But their ownership of the tokens and willingness to trade them is proof that the tokens have value, so they also get incentives to keep holding those tokens. So there you go, now you understand this chart, and now that you understand it, you can hopefully see that it makes no bloody sense at all. See, the render network is a perfect example of crypto people trying to solve a problem that crypto itself caused, that being that proof of work is a fundamentally stupid system. It's a GPU arms race. That's how we end up with these massive warehouses of GPUs that are all just sitting there trying to mine for Bitcoin. Proof of render supposedly fixes this problem because it means all of those massive GPU farms are actually doing something more than solving useless math problems. This is something that Jules Urbach talks about pretty often, that proof of render is a more efficient system. But, is it? I agree that all of these GPU farms doing something instead of doing nothing is obviously an improvement, but it doesn't really solve the fundamental problems with crypto, does it? Let's start with the basics, that every single arrow on this graph is a potential point of failure, right? On our basic graph, we have 3 points of failure. The file can fail to send to them, the file can fail to send back, and the payment can be declined. On the render network chart, we have just so many more points of failure that are both the product of and the cause of crypto's inherent instability. The exchange rate between fiat and crypto is so volatile that you could easily end up spending way more or way less than the work is actually worth, just because the price of render tokens shoots up 1,000% one day for no reason. If for whatever reason the BME ratio doesn't get it right, this could result in either inflation or deflation, either of which could massively destabilize the entire ecosystem. And remember, this is not being handled on a simple graph like this. This is a decentralized network, so this graph is happening hundreds and hundreds of times. And this is a system where a single glitch could break the entire economy. The system could also be broken with no involvement from the render network whatsoever. If the value of Solana suddenly shoots up 600%, then suddenly everything on the render network is 600% more expensive. That's why they moved from Ethereum in the first place. The whole incentive system isn't really the sign of a stable economy, is it? Ideally, you should need to pay people to use your service. But this gets into the fundamental problems with crypto, which is that once you have render tokens, what are you supposed to do with them? You can't, buy a sandwich with render tokens. The only thing you can realistically do with them is try and sell them for real money or use them to buy more rendering, which is fine if you're the one doing the rendering, but what about the node operators or those liquidity providers, a name which I absolutely love? The system cannot function without these liquidity providers, but they're only going to stay providing that liquidity as long as the value of render is slowly going up, because their only interest in this entire system is as a financial investment. They do not give a single shit about increasing 3D rendering efficiency. Okay, I can't say that. I can't see into their souls. I mean, I can read their comments on Reddit, but still, the point is clear. They don't need to care about this stuff to be a liquidity provider, right? That's why the incentives exist. It's to make sure that the value of render keeps increasing so that they stay invested, because if they're not still invested, the whole thing breaks. This also doesn't solve the actual problem with crypto mines at all, which is that they're horribly inefficient and a massive environmental problem, because the incentives behind the mining haven't changed. When a job comes into the render network, different computers will bid on it, and the computer that's most capable of doing the job will win the job. This naturally biases towards the people with the biggest and beefiest computers to use. So the idea that you're going to be able to use your personal PC to make money while you sleep, that's just a lie, because you're always going to be outbid by the warehouse in Texas. Exactly like what happened under the proof of work system. Right now, because the system is relatively obscure, everything is working as intended. But if it ever sees widespread adoption, then the whole thing is a ticking time bomb. And widespread adoption is exactly what Jules Urbach wants. Blockchain-based cryptocurrencies are shifting the world's purchasing power from dollars to bits, unlocking a universe of value and services beyond anything that's been possible in prior models, just as the internet did before it. When renewable energy and 3D printing commoditize the cost and scarcity of acquiring material goods and services, the center of gravity in our worldwide economy will be the blockchain, not fiat currencies. There's always a question when it comes to the people pushing this stuff. Are they a con man, or are they a true believer? And my personal read on Jules Urbach is that he is a true believer. He genuinely believes that crypto and blockchain technology are going to change the world. You're not still pushing NFTs in 2024 if you don't have a genuine belief in their revolutionary power. This colours the way that things are framed, because if you're a true believer, then the reason to add a blockchain to something that doesn't reasonably need a blockchain to function properly is because that's innovation, that's the future. Blockchain will revolutionise this, so obviously you should put it in. Why are you fighting against this? Are you some kind of Luddite? He'll often talk about how proof of render is great because it shows you exactly how the work was done and when. And, it's definitive proof that work was done. And, who cares? Isn't the proof that the work was done the done work? And I know what you're thinking. Wasn't this a video about Star Trek? Listen. It all ties together because Jules Urbeck has a very particular vision of the future, one that he talks about openly in many talks. Jules Urbeck wants to build a holodeck.
And for the rest of this talk, I want to show the kinds of things that we're doing that could leverage some of this technology, but also just talk about the big picture. As I was mentioning, really spatial computing and holographic rendering. Well, there is something in science fiction, right, that represents that really well, and that is the Star Trek holodeck. And what's interesting is that Jensen and many others talk about the future of where things are going as something that's powered by the holodeck. So, and that's something that I think leads pretty nicely into the talk that I want to give today, which is called Towards the Star Trek Holodeck.
It's time to introduce a new player, Lightfield Lab. Lightfield Lab is a company working on creating holographic panels, and they're a business partner of Jules Urbeck and Otoy, to the point where he brings them up in almost all of his presentations and interviews. Now, Lightfield's tech does seem quite cool. They're essentially working on making 3D screens that don't require 3D glasses. Obviously, that's not going to show up well in 2D video, but first-hand accounts do sound quite impressive. The main barrier right now is that the tech is insanely expensive. It's a screen with like 100 times the resolution of a regular monitor, and all of the animations for it have to be custom tailored to the technology, hence the partnership with Otoy. Jules Urbeck specifically wants to combine this technology in a big room combined with his fast rendering software and, naturally, generative AI to create a holodeck. Once you understand this, you can see that almost everything he does is committed to this final goal. I'm not sure I've ever seen someone so committed to a singular vision. Everything that Otoy does, from Octane to the Render Network to the Roddenberry Archive, it's all building towards this end goal. Otoy is a company that was built to make holodecks. This is actually explicitly why the Roddenberry Archive is doing all of this 3D modelling of old Star Trek ships and sets. They're building up a library of things that will eventually become explorable in Jules Urbeck's holodeck. Of course, Jules doesn't just want to build a holodeck, he wants to live in one. Do you remember the metaverse? Do you remember when Mark Zuckerberg went all in on the metaverse and decided to rename his company Meta only for the whole thing to crash and burn when everyone realised that it's kind of a stupid gimmick? If you're not familiar, watch this video, but the rough idea is that there's a bunch of people out there who want to make Ready Player One, but real. Why? Look, I simply do not have the time to debunk the entire metaverse right now, but suffice it to say, it doesn't work because Ready Player One is not a guidebook to building a good society. A few years ago, VR was all the rage in the metaverse space, but Jules Urbeck doesn't want to build the metaverse in VR. He thinks holodecks are the future of the metaverse. He envisions a world where our houses are full of these holographic screens, where our windows are replaced by holographic displays that can show us whatever vista we want, all powered, of course, by the Render Network.
And I just think there's going to be a lot of interesting metaverse applications without any goggles, anything on your face, when light field displays are woven into the fabric of your home, the spaces you have, the objects that you might acquire. It's pretty fascinating stuff.
Considering that he's already got this network of GPUs, rendering LLMs is the next logical step. But beyond that, Jules has talked about the potential future of the render economy in a blog post from all the way back in 2017. In a post-automation world, AI may ultimately evolve to the point where it can generate our media, art, stories, synthetic experiences, and expose us to novel and meaningful truths. This may feel like it threatens the sacred final frontier of human creative output, but we should remember that even if AI one day powers the entire economy of creating thought and art, the only transactional unit of currency in such a system will be when we, as humans, render it valuable. In the holodeck metaverse future, rendering will be the final and most meaningful form of human currency. That is the future that Jules Urbeck is building. And, in case I need to state the obvious, that's not Star Trek, Jules! You're not building a holodeck, you're building a dystopia built around the one thing you've dedicated your entire life to and therefore have decided is the most important thing in the world. Well, guess what, Jules Urbeck? The entire world is not going to be drastically reshaped by faster 3D rendering times. 3D rendering is not going to be the basis of our entire economy, because guess what? I still can't buy a sandwich with render tokens. We should talk about holodecks. Within the fiction of Star Trek, what is the holodeck? Why does it exist? And what does it represent? The holodeck is, within Star Trek, kind of the final form of luxury entertainment. It can be whatever you want it to be. An action movie, a spa, a date night in Paris, and it will look, sound and smell and feel real. It's an extension of the Star Trek utopia as a whole. What a world we as humanity will have created to have a device like the holodeck. And yet, there is a point that Star Trek touches on time and time again, something that almost every single holodeck episode of Star Trek revolves around. The things in the holodeck aren't real. Season 3, Episode 10 of TNG. The Enterprise has picked up a Romulan defector, and he's sitting in the bar depressed at the idea that he will never see his homeworld again. So, Data, with completely pure intentions, takes him to the holodeck, where he has recreated one of the iconic landmarks of Romulus, the Valley of Chula, and for a brief second, the Romulan is in awe. Here it is, his home, all around him. But then the moment passes, and he gets pissed off, demands that the simulation is turned off, annoyed at the very idea that a simulation of Romulus could ever replace the real thing or provide a real sense of comfort. Even if it looks exactly like the real Valley of Chula, it isn't. It's just a copy. There is no going back to the valley, especially not since Jill's friend J.J. Abrams blew it up. You can recreate everything about a place within a simulation, but you can't ever replace the real thing. A beautiful vista isn't just a beautiful vista, it's the journey you went on to get there. If holodecks were real, it would be much more convenient for me to simply enter a simulation of the Rocky Mountains, but I'd rather go back there myself and see the real thing with my own eyes. I mean, isn't that the very drive of Star Trek? To explore strange new worlds, seek out new life and new civilizations, to boldly go where no one has gone before? The holodeck is not the final frontier of Star Trek. The holodeck is a place where officers on long, boring space voyages go to kill time between the things that they actually love doing. And that's kind of the magic of the holodeck, that a device that to us seems insanely cool and wonderful, to them is just the equivalent of watching a movie on your flight to Italy. Let me ask a very simple question. Why does Jules Urbeck want to build a holodeck? Obvious, right? Holodecks are pretty cool. Not so obvious. I mean, yes, I agree holodecks are pretty cool, but there's a very specific way that Jules Urbeck always talks about this that I find completely insane.
The holodeck itself is really, sort of a riff on the simulation theory. If you're living your life, whether it's virtual or real or all this talk of digital twins, right? The entire story of Star Trek was premised on the fact that actually in one of the seasons, one of the last episodes, turns out the entire show you were watching turns out to be a holodeck simulation, right? And that is, of course, a riff and play on the fact that maybe we are living in a simulation. How would we know if reality is simulated so well and so correctly, and probably even enhanced by AI? How would we know? And the thing is, it's not even about whether we are living in a simulation. It's what do our lives look like on the other side of that, especially when we have machine intelligence that could be driving a huge amount of work and procedural generation that we would never have been able to do as humans. And it's something that, of course, is in the Star Trek lore, it happens all the time. Holodecks all the way down, just like turtles all the way down.
Okay, first off, Jules Urbeck is the only person I've ever seen who thinks that These Are the Voyages, the finale of Enterprise, was a good idea. Not even the people who made that episode think it was a good idea. The short he pointed to at the end there was explicitly making fun of how bad that episode was. The entire story of Star Trek is not premised on the idea that it's all a simulation. That's a bonkers thing to say. These Are the Voyages is not a riff on simulation theory. If it was, then it may at least be an interesting episode. It was just a poorly thought out way to connect two different eras of Star Trek. But this is not some tangential point. This is something that Jules brings up in almost every single talk and has done for years. So I guess we need to talk about simulation theory now. Simulation theory is pretty self-explanatory. It's a theory, or a hypothesis, that we are, in fact, living in a highly advanced computer simulation. It's been around for a long time, but I would say it properly entered the public consciousness when Elon Musk revealed that he was a believer in the theory. And, in the words of famous movie director J.J. Abrams, you have people as brilliant as Elon saying that it's highly likely we are in a simulation, and that guy lands rockets vertically, so we should probably listen to him. 2017 truly was a different era of Elon, eh? The argument behind this is based on statistics. If we assume that a simulation of Earth is possible, then that simulation would also be capable of creating another simulation and so on and so forth. So there's only one base original reality, and statistically, you're probably not in it. That's the idea. Of course, that relies entirely on the assumption that a realistic simulation of Earth is possible, which at the moment is still a completely theoretical concept. So we're going off the vibe that this thing may be possible someday in the very far future. We can't even simulate a human brain right now, and we're not even close. Simulation theory is very popular among tech billionaires, and why wouldn't it be? Because it's a theory that places them as the most important people in the world. Because if we are in a simulation, then making sure that the simulation is never turned off is, of course, priority one. So, tech billionaires advancing technology are the saviors of the world. It's an idea that goes hand in hand with solipsism, the idea that you are the only thing you can know to truly exist. You could just be a brain in a jar whose neurons are being stimulated by a machine. A philosophy that basically paints yourself as the main character of reality. You are the only thing that is real and the only thing that matters. In case it wasn't clear, I don't put a lot of stock in simulation theory, or maybe more accurately, I don't see the point of caring about that sort of thing. If we are in a simulation that's so good that it's indistinguishable from reality, then we may as well treat it like we're actually living in reality. So it won't change my life in any way, so I guess give me the blue pill, Lawrence. But it is important to understand simulation theory because it gives us a better grasp of how Jules Urbach sees the world and how he sees the work that he's doing. If he can create his real-life holodeck, then that's one step closer to the simulation of Earth. And if he can create a simulation of Earth, then that is further proof that simulation theory is possible. He is fact-checking reality. But we're making a lot of assumptions here. The primary assumption being that what Jules Urbach is actually making is a holodeck, which is a silly assumption to make. Here are some very basic things that you won't be able to do in Jules Urbach's holodeck. Touch things. Smell things, feel the air on your face, walk too far forward without hitting a wall, go downstairs, hide the door, stay in the room for too long without getting a headache because you're in a room surrounded by very high resolution screens. Because here's the thing about holodecks, as they're shown in Star Trek, they're impossible. They break the rules of reality all the time. It just doesn't matter because it's a TV show. It's not supposed to be realistic, it's just supposed to be entertaining. Jules Urbach is not building a holodeck because it's impossible to build a holodeck. Jules Urbach is building a room with some very fancy screens on the walls. That's not a holodeck, that's the bedrooms from that one episode of Black Mirror. I don't want to be the ultimate cliche of bringing up an episode of Black Mirror in a video about false promises of technology, but the comparison is just too obvious. Season 1, Episode 2, 15 Million Merits presents us with a dystopia where all of humanity live in small rooms where all of the walls are screens, and every day they ride on these bicycles to earn currency which they spend on food, costumes for their doppels on the screen, which is the main way they can interact with each other, and primarily they spend it to skip the intrusive adverts on their walls at night. On that subject, let me tell you about BATs, or Basic Attention Tokens. This is another crypto project brought to us by the founder of Mozilla that's supposed to revolutionize web-based advertising. This blockchain-based cryptocurrency will track your attention span and both reward the advertisers with crypto for the amount of attention they receive, and reward you for watching certain ads. So, monetizing the process of watching ads. Jules Urbach is very excited by the prospect of merging this system with his own technology. Just make sure you're always watching the ads, because this tech can track your attention. Keep watching the ads. Jules Urbach's photon-driven economy just is 15 million merits, sitting all day in our grey boxes, surrounded by screens, buying stuff with crypto generated by us rendering things, making them valuable, so that we can buy stuff for digital things, and make sure we can always use crypto to skip the ads that we're being forced to watch all day long. This isn't Star Trek, this is hell. Here, all day. Nonsense, no. I've done this, no. Why have you done this? No. Done with all of this. Take this. No. I'm not doing this anymore.
All hands abandon ship!
years ago, William Shatner went to space and became the oldest living person ever to make the journey. It's something he's talked about a lot ever since in his books, and even in his interview with the Roddenberry Archive. It had a profound impact on him.
So I know the romance of space, and I saw death. When I looked back, I saw blue, beige, and white, and I saw life. Now, I've read Rachel Carson's Silent Spring, and it affected me a lot. I knew what was happening years and years ago. I didn't realize it at the time, but when I got off the spaceship on the ground, I found myself crying, and I didn't know why I was crying. And I realized I was in grief. What was I grieving? The death of the world. I know firsthand the extinction of species. Millions of things already have disappeared that we didn't know existed, that took 13.8 billion years to evolve. Life! We don't even know what life is. And it's gone. How sad is that? Doesn't it make you weep?
When William Shatner, Captain Kirk himself, went up to space, he expected to find the future, the next step for humanity. But instead, when he looked into that endless black void, the only thing he saw was death. But when he turned around and he saw our little blue planet in that endless void, he realised how magical and how special and how unique it is and how important it is for us to keep it safe and keep it healthy. William Shatner is a complicated man. He's lived for almost 100 years now, and his career has gone through many phases. Stories about his ego are legendary. He once got into a public spat with red letter media. But hearing him talk about this stuff, it genuinely makes me tear up a little bit. I had thought that going into space would be the ultimate catharsis of that connection I'd been looking for between all living things. That being up there would be the next beautiful step to understanding the harmony of the universe. In the film Contact, when Jodie Foster's character goes to space and looks out into the heavens, she lets out an astonished whisper, "They should have sent a poet." I had a different experience, because I discovered the beauty isn't out there, it's down here, with all of us. Leaving that behind made my connection to our tiny planet even more profound. It was among the strongest feelings of grief I've ever encountered. The contrast between the vicious coldness of space and the warm nurturing of Earth below filled me with overwhelming sadness. Every day we are confronted with the knowledge of further destruction of Earth at our hands, the extinction of animal species, of flora and fauna, things that took 5 billion years to evolve, and suddenly we will never see them again because of the interference of mankind. It filled me with dread. My trip to space was supposed to be a celebration. Instead, it felt like a funeral. I love sci-fi, I love space, I love Star Trek, but I know in my heart of hearts that Bill is right when he says that the true magic of our universe is the world around us. And that the most important thing we can do with our lives is to hold on to it, protect it, keep it safe, keep it live. Shatner's trip to space also created what is, in my opinion, one of the most iconic moments in all of tech bro culture. Because you see, Shatner went to space as a bit of a PR stunt by Jeff Bezos and his personal space program Blue Origin. Bezos has talked openly now for decades about his plans to colonize space, how he envisions a future of trillions of humans on millions of planets, all mining for resources, and Earth is just a one small part of that giant human, let's just say, empire, shall we? His philosophy on space couldn't be more different from Shatner's if he tried. Where Shatner saw death up there, Bezos sees nothing but dollar signs, a market to be exploited and capitalized on. And so, we get this amazing scene. Minutes after Shatner has landed, the press are surrounding him, and he's clearly having a serious emotional reaction. He can barely get the words out to explain what he's feeling at that moment. Trying to explain why he's crying and why this experience had such a profound impact on him.
You know what the impression I had, that I never expected to have, is you're shooting up.
Oh my God.
Give me this new champagne bottle.
Come here. I want one. I want to hear this. Here. You want a little of this? Hey.
This is just a perfect moment, the perfect representation of how these tech bros see the world. Cutting off Captain Kirk in the middle of an emotional breakdown to make sure that you get some of the celebratory champagne. Bezos is a Star Trek fan, that's why he invited Shatner there in the first place. But there is a disconnect here between the cheery PR stunt that Bezos had intended, Captain Kirk himself endorsing his space program, and the reality of a 90-year-old man with real human emotions having a profound impact from this experience. Famously, when Bezos made this trip a few months prior himself, he put on a cowboy hat and danced around with a clown. He came off that shuttle with a high five. Space holds no magic for Jeff Bezos. So William Shatner stands there and basically explains right to Jeff Bezos' face that this entire space program is a waste of time and resources, and we should be focusing on preserving Earth as it is right now. And Bezos just smiles and nods and goes, yeah, totally, man, while knowing damn well that he's not going to do any of that. Willfully ignorant of what Shatner is actually saying and just pretending that it's the endorsement that he had wanted. Jeff Bezos may like Star Trek, he may even love Star Trek, but he doesn't get Star Trek. None of them do. Elon Musk, Sam Altman, Jules Zerback, they all cite Star Trek as their inspiration while actively working towards building a world that's the opposite of everything that makes Star Trek's vision of the world worth aspiring to. The thing about Star Trek is, it's a future where we made it, we made it through the bad times, and humanity, we're doing okay. We've solved all the issues of today, racism, sexism, capitalism. It's a world where everyone is free and equal and works towards the betterment of each other and of mankind as a whole. It's a future that we can look forward to. I do not look forward to a future toiling away in Jeff Bezos' space mines, and I do not look forward to a future generating rendering power for Jules Zerback's metaverse. If these men truly understood Star Trek, then this is not what they would be dedicating their lives to. They would be using their considerable resources to the betterment of mankind as it exists today, not some nebulous future. The Federation of Star Trek are not cool because they have a holodeck. They have a holodeck because they're cool. It's a device that can only exist in a utopia, a device with so much potential for exploitation and danger, as many a Star Trek episode proves. A device that you really need to prove that you're ready to have, and we have not proven that. Do you think Jules Zerback was behind the camera watching this interview? Odds are pretty high that he was. What do you suppose he was thinking when William Shatner was talking about the importance of preserving the environment? Was he sitting there nodding like, yeah, totally, we're doing that with my 3D blockchain rendering network? Odds are depressingly high that that's exactly what he was thinking. I don't know what to do with this. I have spent far too long researching a man who I do not know, but I am scared a bit of 765874-Unification. Remember that? That's what this video was about. I am scared of what it means for our future that a man like Jules Zerback will have more money and resources to dedicate to his vision of the holodeck. That it takes me this long to explain all of the problems of that idea when all he has to say is, the holodeck, like from Star Trek. And I don't think he's a con man. I think he genuinely believes what he's saying. And I think that makes him a lot scarier than a con man. As they say, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. If you enjoyed 765874-Unification, I'm not here to yuck your yums. It's pretty rare that something this specific gets made for such a specific group of people, so you should enjoy it, especially when it's made by someone who, at the very least, clearly understands his Star Trek lore. But just be aware of who made it, and be wary of Otoy or any of these tech companies' claims about building a holodeck. Holodecks aren't real, but just because they aren't real doesn't mean they're not dangerous. Anyway, I suppose I should probably clean all of this up. Thank you for watching, and a very special thank you to my wonderful patrons for your continued support. If you'd like to see your name up here or just support the things that I do, then please consider signing up. It would mean a lot to me. As well as a like, comment, share, subscribe, and ring the bell, because bells, bells. If you're looking for something else Star Trek related that's actually talking about Star Trek, then here's a video about the Gorn. Or for something a bit different, here's a video about the Gorn.